Hello, I'm Natasha from Natasha Smart Textiles. I'm a wet felter and I run wet felting workshops. Now the plan for today's video is to make rainbow felt bunting. I've been thinking about this for a while because rainbows during our current lockdown crisis have very much turned into a real symbol of hope and positivity for everyone. So I wanted to make something incorporating rainbows, so this is my take on it. Now this is a really easy to make project. We're just going to make one large piece of embellished flat felt using wool yarns in all the colours of the rainbow, and then we'll turn that into bunting. Now my bunting has got 5 separate felt flags on it. If you want your bunting to be bigger than that, then it's really easy to scale up, just make more felt. Now this video incorporates the same techniques for wet felting as I've shown in much more depth in a previous video. So if you need a bit more guidance about the wet felting part of this, then do have a look at that video first, and I'll put the link in the description down below. So I'll also include there all of the materials and equipment that you need and all the measurements that I describe as we go along. So check out the description for everything that you need detail wise. And in total, I don't think this project would take you more than about 3 hours to make, probably an hour and a half or so to make the felt, and then the same again to cut out the bunting flags and glue everything together. The only extra thing you'll need is drying time for the felt in between. So I hope you enjoy this video and making this project. I know I've really enjoyed making it. If you've got any comments or want to get in touch, then please leave your thoughts below the video or get in touch on social media. Please also like this video if you've enjoyed it, and you might also want to subscribe to my channel as I've got lots of other ideas for felting tutorials coming up. So thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoy it, and happy felting. So let's start off by looking at the tools and materials we need. This is just to make the actual felt to start with. We'll look at what we need extra for the bunting when we come to it. So we need obviously a flat surface to work on. We're going to be working on bubble wrap. The piece of felt that we're going to make, the starting size is 75 centimetres by 25 centimetres. So we need a piece of bubble wrap that's just a bit bigger than that. So my piece that I've got is 80 centimetres this way, 40 centimetres that way, and I've got 2 pieces, so I'm going to use one to sandwich the felt over the top of the other. You could have one really big piece of bubble wrap and just use it folded. I've also got a water bottle, a spray bottle with warm water in it and a big squirt of washing up liquid. Some kind of rubbing tool is also helpful. It could be a wooden tool or just a kitchen cloth would be fine. We need a rolling tool, a couple of tea towels to hand, and also scissors and a tape measure for making sure we get our size right. In terms of materials, we're going to be using about 50 grams of Merino wool fleece roving or tops. I'm sticking to white because I think that's probably the best background for the rainbow colours, but you could use any colour you like or a mix of colours. And then I've got 7 rainbow colours of yarn. Now the important thing to remember here is that these are natural wool yarns, so go for as high a wool content as you can find. I've got these curly loop yarns, but you could use any kind of natural wool yarns that you like. So the first thing we're going to do is lay out our wool fleece fibres. You can see I've already laid out my tape measure as a guide. So I'm going to be laying out the fibres in a rectangle, 75 centimetres wide by 25 centimetres high. We're going to lay 3 complete layers of fibres. The first one with the fibres going in the direction east to west, then the second layer north to south, third layer back east to west again. And what we want is a very fine, even layer of fibres. Now the easiest way to lay out fibres is actually to split the length of tops or roving down the middle, spread out the fibres, and then take small fine wisps of fibre and lay them out overlapping one another, a bit like shingles. So I'm going to build that up now in my 3 layers in alternating directions. So that's my 3 layers of fleece fibres all laid out. I had a little bit of fibre left over from my 50 grams, but as the fleece feels pretty even, it's always worth patting it just to check for thin spots. So it feels even, feels quite substantial. I can't see the work surface through the fibres, so I know that there's enough on there. So we can move on. The size is about 75 by 25 or so. Again, doesn't need to be absolutely precise, but as long as it's at least those measurements, then that's fine. So now we're going to add our wool yarns. We're going to add those just along the middle of our fleece pile, sort of in a middle 10 or 11 centimetres. So again, I might just put the tape measure at the side so I can kind of see where I should be laying the fibres. And all we're going to do for this design actually is lay the yarns in long lengths going across from left to right. And I've got 7 colours. I'm just going to do 2 strips of yarn each colour and just lay those straight over. And the beauty of using the natural wool yarns is that they will just felt to the fibres without too much trouble. So there's the first line, and I'm just laying them in lines going top to bottom in their sort of rainbow colour order. But you could do anything you want here. You could overlap them, you could wiggle them much more, you could make them just a random design of fibres. I think because of the colours of the rainbow are so distinctive, actually you've, however you lay out the fibres, will sort of be very reminiscent of a rainbow. So I think it'll work however you do it. So that's my red laid out. So I will carry on laying out these fibres and then I'll show you what it looks like when I've done. So that's our yarns all laid out. I haven't worried too much about the ends of yarns. I've just snipped them off just beyond the edge of the fleece. Because we're not worrying too much with this project about having neat edges on our felt, because we're just using it as a piece of fabric and then cutting out our flag bunting shapes from it. So we don't need to waste time really worrying about the edges and having neat edges. So we're just going to let those ends of yarns go free off the edge of the felt. So next we need to actually start the felting process. So the first thing we need to do is soak the fleece. So we're going to use our spray bottle with our warm soapy water and spraying, just completely soak all of the fleece and yarns. I'm doing it from above because that minimises the distortion to both the fibres and the yarns. And we're just going to spray, keep spraying until everything is soaked through. So we don't need lots of water pooling everywhere. We just want everything to be soaked. And at this stage, you know, if things move out of place, you can just move them back to where you want them if the spray bottle has moved things. So once this is soaked through, I'm going to sandwich it with our other piece of bubble wrap. So let me put that on now. I tend to use the flat side of bubble wrap for felting, but actually it doesn't really matter which way up you use it. The bubble side up as your surface is often helpful if you want to retain more water within the fleece, but in actual fact, it doesn't really make very much difference which side you use. So I'm going to sandwich that, and then using my rubbing tool, just slowly and gently start to rub the fleece through the bubble wrap so that all of that water starts to soak through all the layers of fleece until the whole thing is soaked. And if I haven't put enough water on, then I'll just take the bubble wrap off and add some more. So you're just going to rub like this, ideally in the same direction that most of the fibres in the yarns is. So in this case it's east to west, because that minimises the distortion to everything. So you're probably going to be rubbing this for about 15 minutes. I'll probably do 5 minutes this side, then I'll tone the whole package over, rub for 5 minutes in the same way on the reverse, turn it back again, give another 5 minutes on this side, and by that time, you know, things should be starting to hold together. So I'm going to do that now, and then I'll come back and show you once we can move on. So I've spent about 15 minutes rubbing the fleece, which is now turning into felt, on both sides through the bubble wrap. Then I've taken the top piece of bubble wrap off, and I've been rubbing for about 5 minutes just with my hands directly on top of the felt. And what that's doing is just this direct contact is creating a greater level of agitation, which is helping all of those fibres to bond together. Now, the tip to sort of knowing when you can move on is if you've got things like embellishments on top of the surface, if you just run your finger in the opposite direction across them, if you can see the yarns moving, then you know that they're not completely locked down. But actually I can see that these are pretty much all staying in place even when I try and move them like this by going across them. So that tells me that we're ready to move on to actually increasing the level of agitation by starting to roll the felt. And you can see at this point as well, you know, we've got a substantial piece of fabric which is developing here. It's still flimsy and it could still be pulled apart, but it's all starting to hold together. So we're going to start rolling, and that will start to firm things up even further. So for rolling, we again want to sandwich up our felt, I'm going to call it felt now, inside the bubble wrap. And that's because we don't want any parts of it sticking to other parts of it, because there is a danger that it will start to felt together. So that's my bubble wrap sandwich, and what we're going to do is, using some kind of roller, is roll the felt for 100 rolls on each edge, so each of the compass points. So we'll start on this edge, roll it 100 rolls, turn it 90 degrees, roll it 100 rolls. So we'll have done 400 rolls in total, rolling on each of the edges. So I'm going to do that on this top side, the upper side. Then I'm going to turn it over and do exactly the same on the other side. So in total we need to do 800 rolls. So now when you've got felt that is much bigger than your roller, I mean, this is where a sort of pool noodle or float can be quite helpful, because obviously they're quite long, or a piece of foam insulation or something like that. But if you've got a shorter roller, actually you can get around this just by folding it in half, what you're working on, because the rolling will still happen to it pretty equally. So we can just fold it up and make it more manageable by doing that. So I'm going to roll the sandwiched bubble wrap package up around the roller. Then, using a tea towel, roll the whole lot up in the tea towel, and that really helps with the grip. So one roll is pretty much there and back, and we're going to do 100 of those. Then unwrap it each time in between sets of 100 rolls, flatten everything out, turn it 90 degrees, carry on. So I'm going to carry on with those 800 rolls, 400 on each side, and then I'll show you what it looks like after I've done that. that's my 800 rolls completed. So I'll just unwrap the package. Now you can see how absolutely soaked the tea towel is. And that's quite a helpful part of the process really, because all that water that we put in, which the fibres need to help them to start bonding together, actually by this point now you don't need so much water, so lots of it has ended up on the tea towel, which is useful because when we come to the throwing stage, if your fleece or felt is completely sopping wet, then when you're throwing it on the table all you do is get wet too. So okay, so let's have a look. Get rid of the top layer of bubble wrap, and in actual fact we now don't need our bottom layer either. Let's get rid of that too. So you can see now we've got quite a substantial piece of fabric which has developed. Now what we haven't got is that much shrinkage just yet, so let's have a little measure. So we started off with about 75 by 25. When you soak down the fibres originally, it flattens down and tends to end up a little bit bigger than you intended, but a bit bigger is better than a bit too small. So we were going for 75 in width, 75 centimetres, so we've got about 67. So there's been a bit of shrinkage going in that direction, and then yeah, I think this spread out and we haven't had much shrinkage in this direction because it's about 29 centimetres. So we still need some shrinkage going on. Now felt shrinks in the direction that you rub it or roll it. So if we really wanted to actually create a bit more shrinkage in this direction, what we would do is roll it in that direction. So just roll it going north to south, you know, rolling it up, even without the bubble wrap now, but just doing a bit of rolling like that is one way of creating some extra shrinkage if you need it. I'm not too worried though, because again we're not aiming for a very specific size with this, because this is just a piece of fabric that we're going to cut up and use. So the next stage then, we have our developing felt, but it still needs some shrinkage, and we'll achieve that by increasing the level of agitation even more now. And we're going to do that by throwing the felt onto the table for probably a 350-ish throws, and that will really encourage all those fibres to start to bond together and grab tighter and tighter. And that's what gives felt its strength, is by all of those fibres being absolutely close up against one another. So we're going to start throwing it. Just pick it up and throw it on the table. It's worth doing these in blocks of 50 throws, I find, just because then if things are slightly going awry or wonky and you want to just sort of straighten things out, it gives you an opportunity to do it before things become completely set. So I'm going to carry on with that now, and we should really see the shrinkage once I've done that. So here's the felt finished after 350 throws on the table in blocks of 50. You can see now, I hope, the amount of shrinkage that we've had here. So the width now is down to about 50, 51, and the height about 22. So that's exactly where we want it to be. What you're aiming for is about 50 centimetres in width and 18 to 20 in height. Certainly no smaller than that. And that gives us shrinkage of about 25 to 30%. Now we've got a fully felted substantial piece of fabric now, and I hope you can see there's a sort of effect on the surface, which I always think of as crocodile skin, and that shows that it's been well felted once you've got that kind of crimp returning to the fibres. So that's our felt finished. So the next step is to wash out the soap. Probably best to do this in a sink. I've got a bucket of water or a bowl of water here just to show you. So I'll just dunk it and squeeze it. What you don't want to do, because felt is stretchy and still prone to get misshapen, is to wring your felt. So, you know, don't do this. Just sort of squeeze it, and then once the water's running clear, just give it a final squeeze to get rid of the bulk of the water. Okay, and then get a clean tea towel, and what we'll do is wrap it up in the tea towel. And that will help get rid of most of the liquid. So I'm just going to kind of roll it up within the tea towel. Just give it some rolls. And that just removes as much of the excess water as we can from the felt to the tea towel. Okay, so now would be the time, if we wanted to particularly try and shape it, we could start to tug parts of it into shape. It'll take sort of some rough handling now and some stretching. It's not going to fall apart now or pull apart. This is a substantial piece of fabric. So that's our finished felt. I would now leave that probably over a radiator or somewhere where it can air dry. And then once it's dry, give it a good steam iron on a wool setting. And that just smooths down the fibres and sort of flattens everything, ready for us to then use it in our bunting project. So I'm going to let this dry overnight, give it an iron, and then I'll be back and show you what we do next to create our actual bunting. So here's our finished felt, which I left to dry overnight and then have ironed, so it's all nice and smooth and flat, so ready for us to work with. So let's just run through what else we need to complete this bunting part of the project. We're going to need an iron and ironing board, a tape measure, something to draw with or make marks with. So I'm just using a pencil, but you could use some kind of invisible fabric marker or tailor's chalk, anything you've got to hand. We need some scissors to cut out our flag shape. I'm using pinking shears because I think that gives a nice edge. But the beauty of felt is that it doesn't fray, so if you just cut it with normal scissors, you'll still get a nice edge from that. Although obviously if you want to perhaps sew around the edge afterwards or add some other decorative technique, then you can. We also need some kind of glue or something to attach our bunting together with. I'm using textile glue, this HT2 Gutermann textile glue, which is really good stuff. But in fact, white PVA glue works really well on felt. You could use a hot glue gun, you could sew it together. So you've got various options there, but I'm going to use this textile glue today. We also need some ribbon for hanging our bunting flags together on. I've got this nice turquoise one which matches the colours in the felt. This is 1 centimetre wide, and you're going to need just under 2 meters of ribbon for the way I'm doing it. Obviously you can scale up if you want to create more flags. Now it doesn't matter if your ribbon is a bit narrow or a bit thicker, that'll be absolutely fine. Just use whatever you've got. And the other really important thing that we need is a template to create our flag shape. Now I've knocked up a couple here to show you, just using graph paper and glued to cardboard. Now the first one here, this is the actual size that the finished flags will look like. And if you want to create your own template, I will put all of the measurements in the description down below the video. But it's really easy to create this. Extra easy if you use graph paper, but if not, just use a normal piece of paper. Draw a line 13 centimetres long. At the midway point, i.e. at 6.5 centimetres, create a line going straight down from that point, and that's 12.5 centimetres long. And then just join up the points, and that creates your triangle flag shape. So that's really easy. Now the other thing that we're going to need, we actually need a slightly bigger flag, because what we want is an overlap at this top edge of an extra piece of felt that we can fold to the reverse, and then we will use the, or we'll put the ribbon inside that fold and glue it in place there. So I've got this template, which is the one I'll actually be using to cut out each flag. So I've added on an extra 2 centimetres to the top, which will be folded to the reverse, and just slightly angled those edges so that you don't see them or don't see the flap once it's folded back. So if you can imagine, if this was a piece of felt, we would be gluing our ribbon to the back there, and then this piece would be folded over to sandwich the ribbon, which keeps it nice and secure and neat. Okay, so that's everything we need for this part. So first thing we're going to do is cut out our flag shapes from the felt, and before we then attach them to the ribbon. Now hopefully you can see that I've already started to draw around the template to create my flags. Our piece of felt is about 50 centimetres wide, and that will give us comfortably 5 flag shapes. So I've started drawing around the template right at one edge, and I'm butting them quite close together. So the idea is that we make sure we use as much of the felt as we possibly can and don't waste any. I'm being quite generous in drawing around the template in this particular instance, because pinking shears actually are quite thick, so I'm not going very tight. I'm kind of giving another couple of millimetres around, sort of angling my pencil, just to give that extra bit of wriggle room really. Okay. And the other thing that you'll notice is that to make the fabric go as long a way as we can, I'm actually alternating the direction that I use the template, because actually you can fit in creating more flags if you go in the different directions. So if I carry on there, that will be 4 and that will be 5. So we'll certainly fit our 5 in. And in actual fact, I think it's quite nice for the design that some of the rainbow colours are one way up and some another actually. So, but it makes our life easier. We were able to create a smaller piece of felt by using it in this way. Okay, so I'm going to carry that on, and then I'll cut out all my flag shapes using pinking shears, and we'll have a look at what they look like when that's done. So that's all the flags cut out. We won't be left with too much excess. I won't tell you to throw this away, because I don't throw away any scraps of felt that I've made. I keep them all, so I've probably got scraps going back about 15 years, but you never know when they might come in useful, so put that to one side for a rainy day. Now obviously what we want to do is be attaching our separate flags to our ribbon now, and it will make that job so much easier if we actually iron our fold first, because as you can see the felt is quite springy. So what I'm going to do is iron the folds of all of them, again with the hot steam iron, well on a wall setting. And that'll be the end flag, and that just will help us so much in putting the ribbon across and gluing it down. So I'm going to iron the folds of all 5 now, and then we'll get on with the ribbon part. So that's our pile of finished flags with all of the folds ironed down, so they're relatively flat, so that's going to make life a lot easier for us. So now we're going to glue each of them onto our length of ribbon. Now I've calculated that we need 185 centimetres of ribbon, and within that I've allowed 50 centimetres each end free for hanging or tying, and then I've allowed 5 centimetres in between each flag. So the actual flag to flag size is 85 centimetres, but if we add on 50 centimetres each end for tying, it's 185 centimetres in total. Again, I'll put these measurements down below the video. So we're going to glue each one. So here's my textile glue, and if I take a flag, so first of all I'll glue under the fold. So just with an even covering of the glue all along the flag. As I say, PVA glue works really well on felt, so you could just use that. Okay, so I've glued along the flap part and pretty much up to the edges, but in actual fact it'll kind of squidge out when it's folded, so it doesn't matter about going right up to the edges. And then I'm also going to glue the other side which the flap will meet, so I'm just going to kind of guess really where that sort of, I've got an invisible edges, but if you wanted to draw that line on, then that might be a useful idea. And you'll be pleased to know that this glue, just like PVA glue, actually washes off quite easily from your hands just with soap and water. So I think I've got enough there. Okay, I'm going to put the cap back on because otherwise it continues to stream out. So I'm going to measure the end of the ribbon 50 centimetres, and then I'll start that first flag. So that's 50. Obviously, if you decide you need a bit longer or a bit less for where you're putting it, then you can adjust that. So that's my starting point. I don't actually think that this particular ribbon has a front or a back, so it doesn't really matter which side I use. So that's 50 centimetres, so I'm going to start the bunting here and just place it right up to the edge of the fold. So that the edge of the ribbon basically is in line with the top edge of the finished flag. And then just press down. And as you can see, that's already stuck down. It's really effective stuff. Okay, so that's the first flag done. Obviously 4 more to go. I'm just going to carry along, measuring 5 centimetre gap in the ribbon between each. The other thing to remember is we've obviously got 3 flags that go red down and 2 flags that go in the opposite direction, so I'm going to alternate those in the finished bunting because I think that'll look nice like that. So you just want to make sure that you've got these in the right order before you glue them on. So I'll carry on with that and come back and show you it when it's finished. So that's our flags all glued in place. As you can see on the reverse, that creates quite a nice neat finish on the front obviously as well. Now the only other thing I would do now is, because I can still feel a bit of moisture in the felt from having just glued the flags. So I would probably leave this to dry overnight under or between flat surfaces, so perhaps on this table with some hardback books on top, so that it's kept very flat, and that will just help secure the glue and keep everything nice and flat. So that's our rainbow felt bunting. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do give me a like below or subscribe to my channel if you've enjoyed it. I will put all of the measurements and equipment and materials that you need in the description below the video, so do have a look at that. I'll also put a link to the previous video that I did about embellished flat wet felting, just in case you want a bit more in-depth guidance to creating the embellished flat felt in the first place. So do give this project a go. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Happy felting.